President Obama addressed the nation this morning.
Look back at the ongoing
20 people are dead and many others are sick.
By camera one. Take one, plate in.
Has set out vanilla lines within the
Now some
Obama
firefighters are battling the fires.
Everybody go ahead and open them both up. DC and Rick, go ahead and tee that up.
Both sides.
Your nation, your news. One American News Network. Okay, welcome back, everybody. To sign up for my free newsletter, Amato for Liberty, simply go to the One America News site at OANN.com and click on the Rick Amato Show fan page. You can sign up there for free. It comes to you by email, comes out weekly. Stay up to date on what's happening here on this show and on the One America News Network and get tons of behind-the-scenes information. We got people signing up every day. In fact, one just went out, an issue of Amato for Liberty just went out today. All right, switching gears now. Join me this time from Shelby, North Carolina, is the Director of Health Policy at the Independent Women's Forum. Her name is Hadley Heath Manning. Hadley, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. All right, so you, of course, are a health policy expert, analyst at the IWF, Independent Women's Forum. And we've got this story brewing where House Republicans in Congress are looking at a vote of as possibly suing President Obama in late July, voting in late July, over his executive order overreach, particularly as it relates to Obamacare. Bring us up to speed on that, please.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, I'm sure you remember the Supreme Court ruled on a case about another part of Obamacare in the Hobby Lobby case. And that was, of course, very big news. But that was not the end of Obamacare's legal troubles. Actually, there are many lawsuits focused on different aspects of the law making their way through the federal court system now. And this lawsuit that Speaker Boehner wants to bring would be yet another lawsuit. Specifically, they want to challenge the president's authority to use executive power to change the implementation deadline of the employer mandate. Twice now, the White House has decided to delay the deadline for when employers of certain sizes have to offer government-approved health insurance to their employees. And this is a very big issue, not just because of the politics of it. Of course, you may agree or disagree with the Affordable Care Act, but because it's a constitutional issue, only Congress should have the ability to change laws and write laws. They're a legislative body, but of course, this presidency has been marked by the president's desire to do things on his own, to circumvent Congress and to use his pen and his cell phone to get things done and to surpass some of what he calls the gridlock or deadlock in Congress. But that deadlock exists for a reason. It represents the views of the people who elected our congressmen and women.
Yeah,
so,
and let me just add, Hadley, for our viewers who may not be up to date on the details, in the Hobby Lobby case, the problem is that these birth control mandates were added by the federal government after Obamacare was passed into law, and that of course is troubling. And this is the crux, as you point out, as to why John Boehner is considering suing the president. What's interesting, first of all, do you agree with their decision, they being the Republicans, John Boehner, to move forward, possibly move forward with suing President Obama over this whole area?
I do. I think it's an important issue about executive power and separation of powers. It raises a good jurisdictional question, or a question of standing, rather. Who has standing to sue the president or to sue the White House when they start to get outside of their authority? Because, of course, the people who are ultimately harmed by this are not just the men and women in Congress who may lose their legislative powers or become less important as the president moves on into a lawmaking sphere, but it's the people themselves. It's each and every one of us who suffers as a result of a presidency that's gone rogue or that's gone outside of the lines and the limits that were placed by our framers, the Constitution. So the question of standing is an interesting one, but I think it's absolutely necessary for someone or something to stand in the way of the president's desire to go outside of his limited powers.
Meanwhile, President Obama and those around are acting cocky. They're kind of laughing, sneering at Boehner and those Republicans that support Boehner's idea. They're saying, come on, bring it on. You want to sue me? I'll just go out and do some more executive orders. American people see right through you. It's sort of the message. Do you think the president is misreading the tea leaves on this?
I do. Importantly, this past week, Jonathan Turley, who's a sort of liberal law professor at the University of George Washington University in Washington, D.C., gave testimony before Congress and said that he supports this idea, that he believes that Congress ought to stand up and sue, because this shouldn't be such a partisan issue. We may agree or disagree again about what the president is doing, but we should all agree that it's not in his authority to do all of the things that he's tried to do. And that extends into the future. Imagine a conservative or Republican president doing these types of things. We should also stand up and say, look, some things are within the purview of Congress alone and shouldn't be taken advantage of by the president.
Hadley, up until now, I had disagreed with the idea of suing the president. I felt it could be politically a losing proposition for Republicans. But you just caused me to pause and possibly reconsider, because you're right when you say that the idea of suing the president for overreaching, overstepping his boundary, does not just apply to President Obama. It applies to future presidents. He could be setting a very dangerous precedent for other presidents who may even go further than he has, should he not be challenged or face the repercussions. So that's interesting you bring that up.
That's right, and this issue's been ongoing for a long time. It's not just the employer mandate, but there are several things the president has done that have raised eyebrows as to whether or not he has the authority to do that. I remember when he gave his State of the Union address, he actually said that he was going to not wait on Congress. He was going to go forward and do things, as many things as possible through his executive powers. And then many members of Congress stood up and applauded this. And the irony there is that he's taking authority away from those very congressmen and women who stood up and applauded the idea. So they should be at least one of the lines of defense against this kind of executive action.
Hadley Heath Manning, before we let you go, I need to point out there's a trend developing on today's show. It's a trend that is commenting on what's happening in America. You pointed out that a liberal college professor from George Washington University has stated that he supports the idea of Congress standing up to President Obama. The previous guest, an African-American gentleman, joined us from St. Louis, Chris Arps. He pointed out that President Obama has lost 10% of the support of black voters in America. It's fallen from 96% to 86%. And we covered earlier in the show the media complaining about lack of transparency, and we now see some traditionally liberal media outlets complaining and writing editorials concerned about the president's lack of transparency. It's a trend that is something that Richard Nixon found himself on in the beginning, and he ignored. I'm not saying that's where this is headed, but that's how these things begin. You care to comment before we let you go?
No, I agree with you, Rick. I think the important thing is one of the political strategies this White House has tried to use, or at least this president has tried to use, is to divide Americans against one another and make it sound as if there's one team versus another team. But at the end of the day, I hope we realize that we're all on the same team. We're all Americans. We all support the same Constitution that provides for limited government.
That's why we...
to protect the different branches, but to protect individual liberty, and that's the main.
That's why we call it One American News. We are all one nation. But this administration has us divided by food, by race, by income, by weather. Hadley Heath Manning, thank you for joining us from Shelby, North Carolina.
Thank you.
Coming up, the Bergdahl debacle continues, but first...